Hey guys, thanks for tuning in for another video on the life of Jesus. We are currently working our way through a conversation that Jesus had with his disciples. See, they had been arguing about who would be the greatest in the kingdom, and this argument really highlighted where they were in their journey. In fact, we can go back and trace their steps and see how they ended up where they are. You see, this argument really was just another expression of what was going on in their hearts. And we touched on all this in our last video, and so if you didn't watch part one, the link is in the description. But as a reminder, our text is Matthew 18, verses 1 through 14, Mark 9, 33 through 50, and Luke 9, 46 through 50. And so in this conversation, Jesus is getting to the root of an issue and laying it out on the table for the disciples to see and to process. He's already told them they needed a change of mindset, right? That their perspectives and approaches on how things worked needed to be transformed because the kingdom of God, well, it functions quite differently from the kingdoms and the empires that they were so familiar with. And to help them see and begin to process this concept, Jesus uses a child as an object lesson. See, a child had no social status, and the child is told where to go, what to do, and even who to be. And they really had no say in it all. And the child was the perfect object lesson because, well, they don't have to humble themselves, right? They are humbled by their status or the lack thereof. And so Jesus encourages them to accept or receive this approach, this perspective, because it models the heart of Jesus and the heart of God, the heart of the kingdom. And if they were going to be the leaders Jesus was leading them to be, this is how they would ultimately be able to identify with Jesus. And it is at this point in the conversation that both Luke and Mark mention that John speaks up. And it seems that he had some thoughts that were triggered when Jesus talked about receiving someone or something in his name. And so let's pick up in Mark chapter 9, verse 38. John said to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." Now, some look at this and say that John was trying to maybe change the subject and was maybe even looking for praise. Like he was saying, okay, we messed up on this, but look at the good that we did here. Now, I have to be honest with you. That makes absolutely no sense to me at all. Now, I could be wrong, but think about this. John is describing a time when they acted in a way that was totally opposite of Jesus and the way that Jesus was teaching them. And it was a time when they did not receive someone. In fact, it seems like it was a time where they actually looked down on someone. This would not have garnered praise. It would have brought attention to the situation and what they had done. And this is exactly what it does. So then, why did John bring this up? Maybe he was looking for clarification. Are there times when this is appropriate? See, we have this situation. Jesus, can you help us understand? Or maybe it was an acknowledgement that they messed up. More like a confession. See, I get the impression that John is saying, look, this guy was not a part of our group. He was not a part of the original 12 who had received the power to do this as a disciple of Jesus. And he was not a part of the inner circle, right? And was not following Jesus in this way, was not trained by Jesus in this way, did not receive power by Jesus in this way. Maybe seeing this guy who was not in their group be successful at casting out a demon when they had just failed, maybe this stirred up some resentment and animosity. Who did this guy think he was? He isn't one of us. We have the power, not him. How was he able to do this? He's not a part of our inner circle. Now, we can continue to speculate about why John brings this up. But what's most important is how Jesus responds. In Mark 9:39, but Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a mighty work in my name will be able soon afterwards to speak evil of me." I can see Jesus saying this maybe with a smirk. Kind of like saying, someone who has this sort of experience, is doing this sort of thing, is not going to have anything evil to say about me. Don't worry about your own status. For the one who is not against us is for us, or on our side. And so, instead of being jealous of their success, you should rejoice that they are on your side. They are doing good. Be careful how you respond, how you treat them. Who knows what harm you will do with how you react? Then he says in Mark 9:41, "For truly I say to you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ will by no means lose his reward." So compare maybe the kinds of works, the things that people do. Remember where the minds of the disciples are. They're thinking of status and privilege and who is the greatest and who does things the greater, who has the better gifts maybe. Think about what Paul says in 1 Corinthians and the issues with people and how they would rank one another based on the abilities that they had. Think about that mindset, and that's where the disciples are. That's where all this is coming out of. And Jesus says, look, being able to cast out a demon, think about the contrast between casting out a demon and giving a cup of water. And if you remember from the last video, Jesus showed them how every disciple is of value. God is aware of what's going on. And with that in mind, no act of support or encouragement goes unnoticed, regardless of how small. And in light of all this, Jesus says, whoever causes one of these little ones, or one of these humbled ones, remember the object lesson of the child. Think disciples. Think the guy who cast out the demon. The person who gave a cup of water. Whoever, Jesus says in Mark 9:42, causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin. And the word translated here as sin means to stumble. We're talking about causing someone to fall, causing someone who does believe, who does have faith, to turn from that faith because of maybe how we react. And in light of the textual context, Jesus is saying, if your pride and opposition were to cause someone to lose faith. And then before Jesus goes on, let's say this. Jesus feels so strongly about what he is about to say that he uses an extreme example of mercy. He says it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he was thrown into the sea. The term great here, it has to do with something that needs to be turned by a donkey. So we're talking about a giant millstone, the kind that the community would use after a harvest. And Jesus says it would be better for him if it were hung around his neck and he was drowned. And if it would be better for this to happen, well, think about it. It's like an act of mercy. This is how serious the disciples need to take this. This is how serious they need to listen to what Jesus is saying here and engage the process of turning and going in a different direction. And then Jesus continues on. He says in Matthew 18:7, woe. Woe is an expression of grief. And so think Jesus saying these words in this tone of grief. Woe to the world for temptations to sin. Again, this is the word for stumbling. For it is necessary that temptations or stumbling blocks come, but woe to the one by whom the temptation or stumblings comes. And with this statement, Jesus, he gives recognition to the current state of affairs concerning the world in general. It's like saying, I get it. The way things are, the way the world works, people are going to stumble. It's going to happen. And when he says this, it carries with it a tone of grief. And that tone of grief continues when he thinks of how sometimes people cause other people to stumble, what people do to one another. And again, we need to keep all of this in its textual context. And he's telling his disciples to be careful and take care that they do not cause one another or even others to stumble because of how they were thinking and arguing and approaching their status in the kingdom. And remember in the beginning of this conversation how they asked, who then is the greatest? You can imagine how some might have been pushing for seniority. they wanted to be seen as the greatest. And there may have been others among them who were just simply feeling less valuable in the midst of this discussion as well. I mean, as the conversation unfolds and others are pushing for seniority, others feeling less valuable, not as good. And the thought of this happening seems to bring Jesus grief. And so he says in Matthew 18:8, if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Throw it away. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than with 2 hands or 2 feet to be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into the hell fire. The word hell here is the Greek word for Gehenna, or the valley of Hinnom. And it's important to remember that this is parabolic language. And this is not the first time we have these examples given in the Gospels. In fact, go back to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. Jesus uses the same language. So these extreme examples demonstrated the price one must be willing to pay to avoid causing others to lose their faith. Again, keeping this in the textual context, the disciples needed to cut off their prideful hearts and arrogant ways of thinking, because each of them is most valuable in the eyes of God. And since each of you are most valuable, Jesus says, don't you think that God is aware of what's going on with each of you? How you are being treated, how you are treating others. And so Jesus says, see that you do not despise, literally think down on, and it's the opposite of welcoming or receiving. See that you do not despise one of these little ones. Again, think disciples. The object lesson is still in place. For I tell you that in heaven, their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. Wait, what? What in the world is Jesus talking about? Is Jesus trying to say that we all have guardian angels? Well, for that answer, you will have to tune in to the next video on the life of Jesus. But until then, grace and peace. We'll talk to you soon.